Evolutionary Theory by Buckley Rue. Buckley is an author. He wrote a full book. It was a fiction book, right?
Yeah, I published my first fiction novel in 2019, and I finished my second one. I'm probably going to try and send that out to publicists and not self-release it. But I'm done with it, and I got Chops Wander Weird working on my cover art as we speak. And so the next thing I'm going to try and publish is probably, I have another piece of fiction that I want to write, but I am trying to actually get this thing I'm about to talk about out sometime in the next year or so. So this is probably going to be one of the next things I work on and try to publish. So that's the main thing I got going in life, I guess. I've also done a whole lot of festival coverage. I've interviewed artists like Android Jones, Beats Antique, Closey, bass music artists, different visionary artists, festy sorts, and
yeah. So let's give a round for Buckley, and you can tell he's passionate, and he brings a very holistic view to all the different philosophies, trying to bring them into unity, right? And a unifying theory, sort of. So let's let him share what he's learned with us.
Okay, so to begin, first of all, I can promise you that nobody this weekend is going to be talking about anything more important than what I'm going to be expounding on right now. And I will make that clear as to why here in a few sentences. But even if you don't agree with me, I can promise you that you will probably find some things that will be worth Googling when you step out of here.
I'll use that promise.
I promise you I will. And so I'll be touching on things like psychedelic theory, shamanism, Marxism, dialectics, a little bit of touch of postmodernism, a tasteful touch, and etc., etc. Okay, so to begin, there's no denying, no escaping the fact that the current trajectory of man has but one outcome, and that is self-annihilation. The forces that govern our lives are not only aware of this, they know this very much so. And rather than try and, direct us in a different direction, every day they stoke the fires of divisiveness with harmful rhetoric. The reality of the need for revolution and planetary cohesion stands out as the greatest call of our generation, and will remain the greatest call of every generation until that call is taken up. Now, what is the term? The people who make up stories about the government. Conspiracy theorists. They want you to believe that a new world order is going to bring corporatocracy and a shadow government. But the reality of the matter is that the shadow government and the corporatocracy has already arrived. Planetary cohesion has not. The reality is that global revolution and planetary cohesion is the next stage of evolution of mankind, and the single greatest thing that humanity will ever achieve. There are two options that we have: self-annihilation or planetary cohesion. There is no third option. So for this reason, I have tried to concoct a theory starting from the birth of civilization, going right up to now in political theory. We have one hypothesis. We must create a neo-hermetic revolution the world over to overthrow the forces of global capital and the realization of the above and the below. The above and below what, of course, you might ask, because I wrote it? The monolith. So, to begin, Hermetic philosophy is important because you can sum up Hermetic cosmology in the phrase, as above, so below. It's a statement that comes from the Green Emerald Tablet of Hermes and is meant to express the unity of the cosmos. Hermetic philosophy is also important because you can trace back every Renaissance period that has ever happened throughout history to Hermetic philosophy. Hermeticism came out of Alexandrian syncretism. Alexandria stands out as the very birth of modernity. Alexandria was the very first melting pot that ever emerged in society. America? Hell no. Alexandria in 300 BC was the very first melting pot society.
And just so the people can know, where is Alexandria?
Alexandria is at the edge of Egypt, and it was conquered by Alexander, and it became a Greek society in an Egyptian province. In its very birth, it was a synthesis of different countries, different ideas, different races. And we all know about the Library of Alexandria that stands out as, the greatest of the wonders of the ancient world. And in the Iranian Renaissance, it was set off because the Neoplatonic philosophers and the Hermetic philosophers were escaping the European Dark Age and going to Persia. And then the Italian Renaissance got set off because they brought back the Hermetic corpus from the Middle East. You can trace every Renaissance period back to Hermeticism. And this is important not only because of that, but because of, like I said, the above and below philosophy. And like I said, the above and below philosophy of what? The monomyth. The monomyth comes from a thinker named Joseph Campbell. Some people, have disagreements with him, of course, over whether or not you can boil down every myth into a simple story, and of course you can't. Myths are written for a variety of reasons, but we do know that all of Abrahamic religion conforms to the monomyth. Vedic philosophy conforms to the monomyth. Buddhist philosophy conforms to the monomyth. So the monomyth kind of breaks down into 12 stages, and I boiled it down into 6, but for the brevity of this lecture right here, I got it going in 5 stages. The first being the ordinary world, which I'm not going to talk about really, but to begin with, the call of adventure. So I'm going to talk about different ideas, and I'm going to talk about them kind of how they relate to these basic sort of templates here, or how they relate to it being a modern idea and an ancient sort of idea. So to begin with, we have the call of adventure. In the beginning of society, you can see shamanism start to take the world over. For the shaman generally undergoes a psychological break and removes himself from society and basically gets torn apart by the ancestors in this purification ritual before he undergoes an experience of apotheosis and returns to society with the treasure. And before I get going on shamanism more, I do have to return to the idea that I'm making the point about the monomyth not taking place on the individual level as well as the social level, which is why the above and below is important. Yes.
Yeah, just like a quick definition of
The monomyth, like I said, it's from Joseph Campbell, and he said you can break down all myth into this basic structure, in which all of these sorts of steps happen.
Oh.
The hero's journey, right?
Yes, the hero's journey.
Can you break down the steps?
Yeah, there is the ordinary world, which I'm not going to really talk much about because it represents the time before everything gets going. But then we have the call of adventure for the hero, the time when they undergo challenges, trials, and temptations, the dark night of the soul, whenever they are at their lowest point, the state of apotheosis, which they reach a state of unity with themselves and with God, and transcendence, that's right. And then the point at which they return.
And they return to the normal world changed.
Exactly.
Like Frodo comes back to the Shire, but he's different because he went to Mordor, right?
Right.
So.
And so to return to shamanism, the philosopher Terence McKenna made a point about how you can find a similarity of the shaman with a similarity of the schizoid. The schizoids and the shaman tend to be suffering the same afflictions. The only difference is that the shaman has healed himself of his afflictions and is now set to come and heal society itself.
The shaman believed that schizophrenia was a gift.
Exactly. Because how else are you going to converse with the gods? And so, shamanism exists in every major culture all throughout the world. And as mankind began to colonize the planet, the shaman became the mystic, the healer, the artist. He became the person who healed society itself. And so here we have shamanism. And so to touch on it in a modern sense, is the philosopher Gilles Deleuze. Gilles Deleuze is one of the great titans of postmodern theory.
Really?
And he basically has this theory about how the schizoid is the person that we should be aspiring towards.
Wow.
And I'm trying to take that a step further and to say not the schizoid, but the mystic himself, because the mystic is healed, whereas the schizoid suffers. And so for Deleuze, the schizoid represented the very limit of human experience. And while Deleuze was an atheist, the shaman is of course not an atheist. So we have an apotheosis here of atheism and theism. And keep in mind, I'm going to be touching on the same basic structures over and over again. You're going to see some overlap here. And so don't worry, as I talk more, it will make more sense, yes.
So why does so Deleuze is an atheist, he doesn't embrace shamanism. Why does it say that we should be embodying the schizoid?
He says we should be embodying the schizoid so as to break free of our memes, our meme templates, our sort of our social conditioning. Our social conditioning, the idealistic structures through which we live in society. He wrote a book called Anti-Oedipus, which kind of was trying to inverse the idea that Freud laid out, that you can boil down every basic neurosis that somebody has through the mother and the father.
Yeah.
And so that's so for Deleuze, the schizoid represented the peak of humanity.
So it's like they're free of all the messages that are being sent at them, all
Right.
the programming.
Right.
But it comes at a cost. They're just like they're no longer able to function.
Yes, essentially. For Deleuze,
But it's worth it, according to Deleuze.
yes. For Deleuze, he said we should be aspiring towards the schizoid. You know what I mean? We should be trying to break free of the social patterns and conditioning that we tend to live with on a daily basis. Does that answer your question?
So he says we should aspire to it, but we shouldn't reach it.
Well, you know, in an idealistic sense, you never really can, right?
Well, some people reach it.
Well, you know, for a schizoid, you know, you're kind of born with it, you know.
Not always true.
Yeah, it does tend to break at different periods in life. But so Deleuze is also important because he also said that the unity of man is expressed in all of the 5 different stages of our senses, and the individual is expressed in a process of univocality. For Deleuze, all of life itself was an expression of one basic process, the as above and below, getting back to this one basic process, the unity of the above and the below. For Deleuze, pluralism equaled monism. So, to continue, we have in the next stage of the hero's journey, in the next stage of society, challenges, trials, and problems. At this point in society, man has begun to make cultures. He has begun to conquer his fellow man. He is joining different races and making different societies through which they can conquer other societies. So, to begin with that, one way that we deal with challenges, trials, and problems is through dialectics. Dialectics is the study of metaphysical contradictions and their solutions. Dialectics was founded by a philosopher named Friedrich Hegel, and Hegel was a Hermetic philosopher. Hegel is known for his philosophy of dialectic idealism, in which it's kind of oversimplifying it, but the basic idea is that there is a thesis, an antithesis, and a basic synthesis of these two. Just like we have a thesis of the individual, an antithesis of society, and the synthesis of the two of them. Again, the above and the below. Another way through which we deal with challenges, trials, and problems is through scriptural interpretation. So, Philo was a Alexandrian Jew living in the first century, and it's widely believed that the Apostle Paul was writing his epistles against Philo.
Oh wow!
And for Philo, the Bible, the Torah, the scriptures itself represented the story of the soul. The story of Exodus for him represented the story of the individual struggle. And to touch on that in a modern interpretation is the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, who is this French guy who is known for his theory of the second naivety. And it's this idea that you start out as a child and you just accept the Bible for what it is and its infallibility, and you kind of grow up and you start to have this like critical sort of interpretation of it, and then you eventually either succumb to atheism or you start using the Bible as a way through which you can understand yourself. So Philo, leading up to the modern age, the scriptures have represented this story of the journey of the soul itself. And so for the next stage, we have the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul The Dark Night of the Soul is a book by St. John of the Cross. St. John of the Cross is one of the great fathers of the Catholic Church, and he wrote this exegesis about his journey of his unity with God, and how, again, you start out, you accept the Bible for what it is. You begin to have this overflowing of faith, and you realize that the structures that we have are not adequate at expressing the basicness that is reality. And so, St. John of the Cross went through this purification sort of ritual in which he eventually achieved unity with God and wrote a poem about it that just fucking slams. I would strongly recommend checking it out. And so,
What's the
Do you
poem?
have the title of the poem?
the poem is The Dark Night of the Soul.
Oh,
Okay.
So, in The Dark Night of the Soul, St. John of the Cross talks about this feeling of no way out. There is no way out of this. This experience of a bottomless pit, there is no way through which you could possibly come through on the other side of this, and yet he does. So for the next thing I have written here, I've got capitalist realism. Capitalist realism is an idea that comes from a modern philosopher. Guy literally killed himself 3 years ago. His name is Mark Fisher. And Mark Fisher had this idea of capitalist realism, basically saying that as socialism has left the world stage as an alternative to capitalism, capitalism has basically run amok and basically just does what it wants. It has left an entire generation of people knowing that to even try to do anything about it is just completely pointless. For Mark Fisher, there was no way out of capitalism, and he succumbed to it. He very frankly expressed this idea that comes up in The Dark Night of the Soul of the no way out. And so for the next thing I have here, I have apotheosis. So Stanislav Grof is one of the main fathers of psychedelic theory.
And holotropic breathwork.
And
right?
holotropic breathwork, that's right. Stanislav Grof has these four basic, what he calls the basic perinatal matrices of rebirth. So the psychiatrist Otto Rank said that whenever we are born, we have this great trauma that we experience going through the birth process, which haunts us for the rest of our lives. And if you think about it, you know, Jesus said you cannot be born again unless you are born of spirit. And the Buddha says that you must become reborn. There is this idea of apotheosis of the great rebirth. And in the apotheosis and in psychedelic theory, in the basic perinatal matrices, the experience of the no way out quite frequently comes up before the individual undergoes the experience of apotheosis. Apotheosis, if you don't know what that means the merging of like and unlike things. It is a idea of concrescence, the merging of opposites, the merging of the mind and the body, of the individual and society, the realization of the above and the below. And so, for the next idea that I have here, we have Marxism. So, Karl Marx is important to the idea of apotheosis because Karl Marx knew nothing about apotheosis. This dude knew nothing about apotheosis. Karl Marx was, by all contemporary accounts, a bastard to be around. And so, nonetheless, he came out with this idea, which I am literally talking about right now, of the march of history. Karl Marx had this idea that mankind begins out in a state of primitive communism, and then it undergoes a state of slave society. It undergoes feudalism, it undergoes capitalism, and socialism, and then planetary communism again. You see, it begins with communism and essentially ends with communism. Now, people want you to believe gay space transcommunism. Yes.
Yes, anarcho-communism.
Now, people want you to believe that communism does not work, and that is fucking wrong, first of all. China owns our economy. Let's just be clear about that. And Cuba is the most sustainable society that exists today. It has the most people living over 100 in the world. America has been waging an economic embargo on Cuba and Venezuela and every little communist country in the world. America, anytime a communist society pops up in a Latin American country, America overthrows that motherfucker sooner than later. America does not want you to believe that socialism can work, but socialism is the next stage of mankind. There is no getting around it. Capitalism is wiping us off the face of the earth. It is only going to continue to wipe us off of the face of the earth. There is no such thing as kind capitalism. Capitalism, by its very nature, is trying to just make as much money as it can for as few people as possible. It is not your friend. It doesn't care about you. Capitalism is the fucking enemy here. Make no mistake about it. Capitalism is the enemy of mankind. But just because it is the enemy of mankind does not mean that we cannot use it to obtain apotheosis, because you must make a merging of capitalism with socialism in order to make mankind work. So, to continue. Oh yeah, and before I even can go on with it, the philosopher Jean-Luc Baudrillard even referred to the linking of Soviet and American satellites as a state of apotheosis. I mean, the guy literally took the words right out of my mouth. And so, also in Marxism is the idea of dialectics. Again, dialectics keeps popping up here. And unlike Friedrich Hegel in communism, they are known for their philosophy of dialectical materialism, which basically turns idealism on its head. So, now, we've come to the last stage of the hero's journey. The second coming of Christ is probably the most important idea in Christianity. Now, Christians want you to believe that Jesus is going to come riding back on a cloud, and they're not immediately going to put this dude to death again. I think that's probably laughable, but nonetheless, in Christianity, there's the idea of, Christ and then the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, the third leg of the Trinity, represents the point at which all of society itself becomes like Christ. So we must all become like Christ. We must make the second coming happen the world over. We don't need to be Christian about it necessarily, but we should obtain the Christ consciousness within us and use it to benefit the rest of mankind. And so, the next thing I have is the internet.
So much better than no light.
Should I
So much better than no light.
Yeah.
here?
Right?
These are so
Your phone fell out.
Oh, thank you.
I have an idea.
The internet.
Should I put this in front
The
of the
internet
whiteboard?
represents
Yeah, sure.
already
Thank you.
Yeah,
the
of course.
birth of.
Hey, perfect.
Oh my God, that is so.
That is
good.
perfect. Nice.
The internet represents the birth of the planetary society itself. The planetary society has already been born. We we should demand of the forces which govern our lives to be at least as cohesive as the internet is. The fact that I can send a message to Australia and it be get there in 5 seconds, no problem, but we have to spend the rest of our lives folding napkins is for $7.50 an hour is quite frankly just absurd. There's no reason why people should be being grinded to death by basic jobs that give them nothing when we have the means to take care of ourselves. We just don't use it. So that essentially wraps everything up, you know. I can't sit here and tell you, you know, what ideas, what policies the Planetary Society must put forth. That is for the Planetary Society itself to decide. But there are ideas. There's universal basic income. There's a new system of economics that we can create. There's a new world that waits to be discovered before us. We do not have to live with these basic structures that keep telling us that, oh no, we can't afford to pay you more, but we can let corporate profits just keep soaring right off the map. There is no reason for this. So, we must create a universal, a global revolution the world over to realize the above and below that the Hermetics were describing. We must create a synthesis of all great spiritual and economic ideas to create a society which everybody can get along, everybody can work together, we can colonize the stars, we can break out into space and do fuck all. I don't care. That's about it, guys. Thank you for coming.
Any questions?
I hope not. I fucking think I boiled it down pretty well.